everybody. Welcome back to the Beyond the Peloton podcast. I'm Spencer Martin from the Beyond the Peloton newsletter. As always, I'm here with my co-host Andrew Vontz from the Choose to Hardway podcast, thebetterlab.io, and we have a little bit different of an episode this week while we are away on our 2025 planning retreat in Tucson, Arizona, hosted graciously by Pace Ranch. We are airing an interview we did with the Canadian cyclist Jack Burke a few days ago. Jack talks about his path into the sport and how he came to be a social media sensation earlier this year when he got Strava KOMs on 3 of the hardest climbs in professional cycling, the Stelvio, the Mortirolo, and really impressively, Alpe d'Huez. Jack talks to us about how he came to be where he is and where the future will take him, what he hopes to achieve, and his in skimo, how skimo racing is actually a better workout than cycling. But we just jump right into it. When you hear Jack, he's going to be talking about a conversation he had with Mike Woods, and we'll roll from there. So let's get into Jack, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Okay, well, you want to use the Mike Woods example? Because I can give you an example there. And to be clear, I'm a huge Mike Woods fan. I think it's such an inspiring story, such a nice guy. Everything's awesome. Look at what happened with Mike Woods. He went over to Europe on one of these crazy small Conti teams. He was on the team with Alex Cataford. What was Amore Vita or something like that? Amore Vita. He was on that team. And then when he talks about the crazy things, like living in a house that's full of mold and all this kind of stuff, I'm like, dude, that was me. That's what I did. And again, huge Mike Woods fan. I'm not taking anything away from that guy because I really admire him that way. He quit and went home halfway through the first year and then went back to the North American scene and then went on to rally. And that was his stepping stone team to get into those big races, to prove himself, to get onto EF Cannondale. So when I hear that story, I'm like, what the fuck? I've done it literally 10 times as long. I've been on those crazy teams for 5 years. And so I got a little bit angry, not angry. I was a little frustrated with Mike one time when I was talking to him because he's like, hey man, you can't make excuses and whatnot. I'm like, dude, you quit and went home after half a year. I've been doing it for 5 years. What are you talking about excuses? You know exactly how hard this is. Don't tell me I'm making excuses here. And that's the part that people don't get is that people look at all the success that I've had this year, oh, how could you be doing so well off of 4 months of training and not taking it seriously? It's there's 3 things. 1, I have a coach again for the first time since I came to Europe. That's a big thing. 2, I have a job that pays me, so I'm not I can have food and rent covered. I have the most basic things covered. And 3, it's on me, that I just learned to relax. I was just having fun with it. I blew so many of my own opportunities over and over again because I was just gripping the bars too tight and pushing way too hard, always overdoing it because everything is just do or die. Versus this year, I didn't care. I was strictly doing it for fun. And excuse me, I still remember when I first started working with my coach, he's talking me into doing the training and I'm like, what are we training for? Are we training for skiing or biking or mountain biking? I don't even have a race bike yet, man. What are we talking about here? And he was the one just encouraging me to do it. And the face palm moment for me was when he had to send me a text saying, hey, Jack, you need to upload your workouts and leave comments. And I'm like, oh, Jesus Christ. I'm such an amateur junior right now. And that was the moment where I'm I cannot blow this opportunity because this guy is amazing. Steve, my coach, he wants to work with me. The guy is helping me so much here. And I'm, for the first time since I was 13 years old, I'm the one not taking it seriously and it's someone else kicking me in the ass versus for the rest of my life, I was the one punching the throttle all the way and it was everybody else trying to calm me down. But those are the 3 things that I have this year. I have the basics to live, money wise. I have a coach. And I learned to relax and I've never worked harder in my life, but I've never had more fun with it.
Yes. Well, just to go back a little bit.
Sorry.
People don't know who this is. Jack. We have Jack Burke. We're very happy to have you, Jack. I've been following you on Instagram for quite some time and was just sending out screenshots of your Instagram stories. Can you believe the rides this guy is doing? But then you kind of blossomed into some sort of social media celebrity. You have a book called How to Become a Professional Cyclist. You wrote this a year and a half ago, I believe, or you published it. You have the second edition coming out.
The second edition's out now. I guess I would have published the first edition just over 2 years ago. So the second edition's out now.
And you're a Canadian living in Austria. I'll let you kind of expand on the story. But Canadian living in Austria, and this last year you were not racing, had no team, had no bike. You procured a bike, you got a coach, and you just started destroying basically the hardest Strava KOMs in the sport. The Stelvio, the Mortirolo, and Alpe d'Huez. Alpe d'Huez, pretty big Strava segment. So that's where we're starting from. But where are you podcasting from? Let's start there.
So I live in Stubaital, which is right near Innsbruck in Austria. And okay, like it's awesome, but I always tell people, no, Stubai sucks, don't go. Like this is the problem. The Europeans, they find a sweet spot and they tell everybody. But yeah, so I live up in the mountains just above Innsbruck in Austria.
I actually took a family vacation to Garmisch in Germany.
Yeah,
and then
really
rode
close
to Innsbruck and rode back. It was like, it's beautiful down there. It sucks.
I ride there all the time.
To go.
Yeah.
It's crazy because it's a big city in the middle of the Alps. It's like a big cultured city, just like sitting in the most beautiful alpine scenery you've ever seen.
It's perfect. Like it's so good. And honestly, so there's actually a handful of pro cyclists that live here. Like a lot of the German riders either live here or in more Western Austria towards the Bodensee. I don't understand why more pro cyclists don't live here. I mean, the big one is just the tax benefits. But if you're a pro athlete in Austria, the tax benefits are 15%. And okay, I guess when guys are earning so much money, it makes sense to go to Andorra or even Monaco if you're really earning a lot of money. But Innsbruck here, it's like I think it's the best spot to base yourself as a pro cyclist because you're way closer to better altitude camp places. You have an airport in Innsbruck. Like I have an airport 20 minutes from me. And I live up in the mountains, so like most guys that live in Innsbruck, it's like it's right there. I think it's paradise here. The riding's awesome. I mean, if you can suck it up a bit in the winter because it's a bit cold, but I mean, like living in Andorra, it's the same thing. So I really don't understand why more pros don't live here.
And to back up, you live in a nice apartment now, beautiful area. It was not always this way. You're from Canada. Where in Canada?
So I was born in Toronto, and then after high school, I moved to the West Coast, like everybody does for university, and then I just never went home. So in Canada, I call Squamish home. So the outdoor recreation capital of Canada. Yeah, Squamish sucks. Don't go.
We had Swing Tuft on this podcast. He's another West Coast guy,
of course,
out there, mountain man. And then you went to. I mean, Andrew and I kind of allude to this a lot on the show. Like this North American cyclist goes to Europe. You're living in a mold-infested basement. And the reason you're doing so, because you don't have any money and you're not making any money and you can't get a job because you don't have the visa ability to earn money outside of cycling. So you did this for like 5 years. You stopped doing this, wrote a book, started a podcast. Is that now like what pays your rent and allows you to be more stable with your training?
Totally, yeah. So the book ended up doing really well. So that's what I earn all my money from right now. Like I'm by all means a hobby cyclist. Like I haven't earned a penny from bike racing this year. Like I do my normal work with the book and my podcast and all that kind of stuff, and that's where my money comes from.
And I mean, your book, geniusly titled "How to Become a Pro Cyclist." Andrew, I don't know if this was you, but I was telling Jack earlier this morning when I was a younger man, early 20s, I'm just furiously Googling, how do I become a pro cyclist? And this really difficult thing to figure out because the fastest person you know is like maybe a local Cat 1, like Brian Jensen on the Tradewind Energy team. That's a pro.
Yeah.
But that's not really, he's not doing that full time. Maybe you know someone that was on Jelly Belly once. There's just, especially pre-modern era, there's just not a lot of information. So the fact that you wrote this manual it's basically a step-by-step manual of how do you go from not knowing anything about cycling to becoming a pro cyclist. A lot of good anecdotes, a lot of good background on you, but great idea, great book, great execution. I don't know how we want to dive into this, but there is just something that sticks out to me in the book. You talked about being on a team, the Jelly Belly team, with Matteo Jorgensen, who's now obviously very good. Andrew and I just talked about how he might be one of Visma's GC leaders next year. I don't want to like misquote you here, but you basically say the guy doesn't have a lot of talent and succeeds because he's good at the soft skills that a lot of other North Americans aren't. Is that a fair representation?
Yeah, I mean, okay, like to be clear, so Matteo's a friend. Like I was saying it like jokingly, like knowing he'd take it well.
Yes. Yeah.
And then and the other thing is I meant it strictly as a compliment. I was not taking a shot at Matteo in any way. It was only meant as a compliment. What I said in the book was a lot of people, like the two most overused words in cycling are talent and overtraining. And the people who throw around those words the most are the ones that are never going to have to worry about it because they haven't even tried as hard as the best guys in the first place. That was what I was saying. And my point, and to be clear, I didn't spend that much time with Matteo in 2018 because he was mostly racing with the national team over in Europe then. But what I just remember about Matteo is like, physically, he was really average. Like it wasn't like he was some sort of physical freak. What stood out and impressed me so much about the guy is it sounded like he has been studying bike racing since he was 4 years old. Like I remember being it would have been coming back from the last race of the year. Like we were coming back from Japan and we were driving in the car and he was talking on the phone with his agent because we were both going to Europe next year. And he was talking about all these races and like the French DN1 teams, and I have no clue what any of this stuff is. Like I'm like, what's a French DN1 team? And he's talking about all this, and he knows the place where he's going. And he spoke French before he even got off the plane. Then he went to Movistar. He learned Spanish. Like what impressed me so much about Matteo and why I'd say he's such a great example is you look at how successful that guy is. I really don't think he has any special talent. Maybe he does. Maybe I'm wrong on this. Again, I didn't spend that much time with him, but I don't remember seeing anything that physically talented about him and seeing a lot more physically talented guys that didn't do all these little off-bike things that don't directly help you push the pedals, but they're absolutely essential. But most people ignore them because they just want to focus on their training and their recovery, like studying VeloViewer for every corner of the race or understanding that learning French is going to be really important. And like the thing I was like, man, I still don't speak fluent German and I've been here for 5 years versus like Matteo spoke fluent French and Spanish when he joined those teams. Like that stuff, he really did well.
I don't think you're in the minority on the German part. Learning French and Spanish is one thing. Learning German is, I feel like every time I go to Germany, I know German less. It was like, I'm more confused than when I arrived. But that is interesting about Matteo. I kind of wonder if we really should like frame this as in, you mean not special talent, like compared to
I don't think he has a crazy VO2 max guys or anything like that. That's the thing, right? Like, I don't know. Maybe he's been in a testing environment and he's done really well. But you always see these guys at training camp where they have like the biggest numbers and all this kind of stuff. And then it's like the question is normally, okay, can they race their bike? Like, can they translate it to a race? I don't think Matteo had any of those special genetic gifts. Okay, maybe like relative to the average person, he's above average that way. But relative to most World Tour pros, like I would say there's a lot of guys with a bigger engine than him.
And Andrew, we're getting into your wheelhouse here. I'm slightly obsessed with this. Like when you're 17, 18, 19, there's, the best athletes, and then there's a level below them. And then when you get to your mid 20s, it almost feels like that inverts. And Matteo would be a great example of that, where what makes him special, like potentially just his ability to like just work consistently year after year, day after day. And then, as you say, make his life easier off the bike. But I know what you mean about these French teams and races. We're like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, it's like someone speaking Latin. It's like, I don't know what these teams are, what these places are. And then you're just on the back foot right away. But
the hardest races you've never heard of.
Yes, exactly. It's like, this is way harder than Redlands and you have no idea what the race is.
Yeah.
I'm feeling I'm representing the listener, and I'm dying to go inverted pyramid here. I want to cut. I want to cut to it. Why those KOMs? Why did you select those KOMs? What kind of statement did you think they made about your fitness, and what did you think they would potentially do for your trajectory as a professional cyclist? And then we can come back to talking about some of this other stuff. Sure. But I know I think that's one of the key questions that listeners are going to have who have followed you closely as we have.
Yeah, I know. The funny thing is I've got this question so much and I don't have a good answer for you because I didn't plan any of it. Like, so the way that the KOM stuff came up was my coach talked me into training we spoke for the first time at the end of April on my podcast. He convinced me to start training at the beginning of May. I did all these races. By the end of September, I guess, was probably like my last race or something like that. And then I was like, I'm still motivated to keep racing. Like I want to keep going. Like we just started training. I feel like I'm getting better here. And so we came up with the goal. I was going to race the ski mountaineering World Cup season this winter for Team Canada because I raced the World Championships for Team Canada last winter and I did well. And so a lot of people were pushing me to try to go for the Olympics for that. And so my plan this whole year was to race the Skimo World Cup this winter. And then so once the races were done, we were like, well, okay, we got to keep me in shape somehow. And I need a goal to keep me motivated. So we came up with doing the Zwift Academy because so many people had been pushing me to do this for years. And I just could never motivate myself to do it. I'm like, I hate the trainer. I cannot do this. Like, it's going to kill me. And then so the way I got myself motivated to do Zwift Academy this year was like, okay, that ends on, I think, November 3rd, I think was the last day of it. And so it's like, okay, there's a goal to get me from the end of September until the start of November. And then that keeps me in shape for that. I'll train hard for that. And then I'll just jump on my skis and start skiing. And then if something good comes from Zwift Academy, awesome. But I wasn't expecting anything for it. And then so I'm doing all these trainer workouts to do the Zwift Academy thing. And I was just getting so furious with it because it's like beautiful weather. It's sunny. I'm seeing all my friends out having fun and I'm dying on the balcony on this stupid trainer. And then one day I finally just snapped because like nothing's connecting. Everything needs to be calibrated. I don't have a strong enough Wi-Fi connection. Now I've been screwing around for like...
just like us. Yeah.
Like,
we talked about this so much.
Oh, it's driving me nuts. I'm like, I've been screwing around with technology for an hour just to get a workout in. So I did the workout, I finished the workout, and then I just texted my coach. I'm like, yo, Steve, I'm resting tomorrow, and then I'm going to go drive to the bottom of the Stelvio, and I'm going to go like test myself on that. I want to see how I go on that. So I went with one of my buddies, and I did it, and then like it was like 1 degree and raining or like snowing at the top. There's snow everywhere. It was absolutely freezing cold. And I'm like putting my jacket on. My buddy comes up to me. He's like, did you get it? I'm like, yeah, I think I got it. I'm pretty sure I got it. And then like he's stoked, like we like high five, but then we're like freezing cold. So we're like, let's just get out of here. And like as we're going to leave, his girlfriend called him. And because she knew I was going to go do this, and she's just like, did Jack get it? And we're like, yeah, I think he got it. And she's like, you got to make a video, take some photos, something. Like if he broke the record up the Stelvio, he's a legend. And we're like, a photo of what? Like it's snowing, it's raining, like we're freezing. Like we want to get out of here. And she's just like, make the video. We're like, okay. And so my buddy makes like this 5-second terrible video of me just like holding up the Scott bike. And we're like, okay, sweet, good. We're out of here. We get out of there. And then I posted it on Instagram. And I think it has like 500,000 views at this point. Like it went viral. It went nuts. And I was just like, and I was the most trending rider on Pro Cycling Stats. Ahead, like second place was Tadej Pogacar. Third was Jonas Vingegaard, which was I was like, are you kidding me? Like out of everything I've put myself through my whole career, all you have to go do is some Strava stuff. And so I did that.
We should say the Stelvio is like one of the... It is a crushing climb. Like if you live in North America and you don't live on the slopes of Haleakala, it's hard to it's 15 miles long. It's like over 8% average grade. Like a good time is an hour and a half. It took me 2 hours if I did it today. You did it in 1:08. Like that's, and you did over 400 watts average and you're almost at 10,000 feet by the top. So that's a seriously good ride.
Yeah. And so actually, this is kind of cool because I don't think I've talked about this before. But so I'm sure most people would know like the Lantern Rouge cycling podcast. And those guys reached out to me after to say like, dude, this is the best performance we've ever seen above 2,500 meters in cycling. And that was just the message I got. And I was like, well, that's cool. Like, I mean, like, I have no idea how they measured that or what they did with that. But I'm like, these guys analyze every cycling numbered data on the planet. So I'm like, that's sweet. And then, yeah, so I got that. And then I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is so cool. And then Scott, the company, because they just gave me a bike to borrow for the year. And then so they were stoked because it's like the best marketing for them. And so then I was just hanging out with my friends at the shop, at the warehouse. And they were like, Jack, we have a new bike for next year. You want to see it? And I'm just like, yeah, I want to see it. And so they showed me the new version of the Addict RC Ultimate, so I had like the old one, and then they went to show me the new one. And they're like, what do you think you can do with this? And then I just got the idea in my head. I'm like, I wonder if there's snow on Alpe d'Huez yet. And so I just was checking like webcams and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, there's no snow on Alpe d'Huez. And then so I just told some of my friends, like we were just hanging out at my buddy Marcus's place. And I was just like, I want to go try to break the record up Alpe d'Huez. And they're just like, oh, we're coming. Like we're coming with you. Because my plan was just to drive there by myself and give it a rip. But then my friends are like, no, we want to come with you. We want to see this. And then so we just made like a guy's trip out of it. And then there was another guy who's like one of my friends who has a YouTube channel called The Cycling Dane. He was interviewing me about the Stelvio one. And when we finished that podcast, we were just like talking after. And I was just like, dude, I want to go after Alpe d'Huez. And he's like, oh, I'll come like film it and all this kind of stuff. It'll be great. And he's thinking, I mean, next summer to do it. So he's like talking about times in July.
What time of year is this? It's got to be like October,
November,
right? November. Oh my God.
And so I'm like, no, dude, next week, like November 11th, that's when I want to do it. And he's just like, oh God, okay, fine. Because he's in France. And so, I think he's in France, or maybe he's in Denmark. And so he's like, all right, I'll meet you at the bottom of Alpe d'Huez. We'll stay there. We'll make like a guy's trip out of it. This will be fun. So my buddies came so they could go for like a ride the day before. I went and I did Alpe d'Huez, and I got the record on that. And like they made the video and all that kind of stuff for it. But then it was driving me nuts because Scott said I can't tell anybody for another like 3 weeks because they haven't released the bike yet. And so they can't get leaked photos of the bike yet. And I was like, are you kidding me? I just broke the record of Alpe d'Huez and I can't tell anybody. So this is driving me nuts. And that was on Monday, November 11th. And then I think it was like Thursday. So a couple days later, I found out I didn't even make the first round cuts for Zwift Academy. And then I was pissed about that because I was just
why do you think that happened? Because I thought that was a slam dunk.
So did I. And then when I was like, I didn't expect to win the thing, but I was hoping to at least make it to like the first round or the finals or something like that. I think probably because of my age and probably because like what a lot of people think, it's like, oh, he must not know how to race his bike if he's been racing for this long and he hasn't won a big race. Like he must not know how to race his bike, which it's not true. But that's the picture that it paints for people who only look at the data, who don't like meet you in person type thing or see you race in person. And so I was pissed about that so I was just like, fine, like I'm not good enough for that. I'm going to go break the record on the Mortirolo. And then also if I break the record on the Mortirolo, I can tell people about that and that'll like tie me over until I can tell everybody about Alpe d'Huez. So then I checked the weather forecast and it was like, okay, it'll be sunny in a couple days. And then so Saturday, I just drove by myself to the bottom of the Mortirolo. It was like 4 hours or 4.5 hours from where I live here in Austria. And I've done that climb so many times because I've done so many training camps in Livigno and I'd been looking at it for so long. And then, like another side story on this, a guy named Aspion Helamosa, who came on my podcast earlier in the year, told the story about, so he rode for Trek in the World Tour a few years ago, didn't get re-signed after his Neo Pro contract was gone, and then came on my podcast and was talking about how, like early in the spring of 2024, came on my podcast, told the story about how he wants to get back to the World Tour by like gravel racing and sending the team's power test data. And like, I'm your biggest cheerleader if you want to do that. Like, I think that's awesome. Go for it. Go for your dreams. Don't quit. Absolutely. But I'm thinking like, there's no way this is going to work. Like, come on, man. Like if you already had a shot at the World Tour, they're not going to give you another shot just based off power data. But then he went and did the Mortirolo and he got the second fastest time up it and was like close to Nibali's time. And did really well on it. And then he got a contract with Jayco. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, that's so cool. And then he came back on my podcast to tell the story. And that was super cool. And then so I was thinking like, okay, I'm going to go test myself on the Mortirolo then. And then, yeah, I went and I did it. And that was like the best one in my opinion. Like the legs I had, that was like one of those days where you just have diamonds in your legs and you're just flying. And I smashed it. And the cool thing about it was there's nobody there. It's just like a cold fall day. Like no one's on the climb at this time. It's just me. I just drove there by myself. I did it, had amazing legs. And it was just a really fun day. But that's the story behind the KOMs.
All right. Yeah. All right. So you're kind of directionally answering my question. I think my more specific question is, did you feel like doing these climbs, getting these KOMs would catch the attention of World Tour teams? Or did part of you think like, hey, I just need to go out and do 20 minutes at 9 watts per kilo or like what are, that's absurd, obviously. But did you think that was going to be sufficient to actually catch the attention of a World Tour team, given the length of the climbs and what you know about
so
how
I
they
didn't
look at power
believe
profiles?
in the World Tour. I didn't believe that it would lead to a contract until after all the hype blew up around Alpe d'Huez. And then when everybody started talking about it, then I was like, that was actually the crushing part for me. Sorry, excuse me. Because I was strictly doing it all for fun. And it was just like cool because it's like, for me, I was like, man, it'd be amazing. It'd be so cool to have the fastest time on these climbs. Like I'm just a cycling fan. Like that'd be amazing to have for the rest of my life, even if somebody goes and breaks it tomorrow. And so it didn't mean anything to me until after all the hype around Alpe d'Huez started. And then when everybody's like, sign this guy. And then all these teams started reaching out to me, I was like, holy shit, this might actually happen. Like, this is crazy. And then that's the more crushing thing because then I started to believe in it. and think like, wow, this might actually happen. Like 16 years of killing myself, I might actually finally break through for this. Like that would be so amazing. Like that'd be the dream. That's the dream I've been chasing my whole life. And then it doesn't look like it's going to happen now. So then that's what hurts a little bit more. But yeah, up until a few weeks ago or a few months ago now, I wouldn't have cared either way because I didn't think it was going to lead to anything.
Yeah. I mean, even if it doesn't happen, and I sincerely hope it does, Jack, I think we all wish that for you. And I still believe, man, I think it's going to happen. It sounds like we have the foundations here of like, this could be a 30 for 30 on ESPN or a Netflix series. So maybe that's what's next. Maybe it's, maybe that's actually what's coming, but such an incredible story. And there's so much to unpack in what you've shared. Just a couple of things I want to hit on. Spencer and I have had Benji and Patrick both on this podcast and on my podcast, Choose the Hard Way. I'm going to need to reach out to them because I'm wondering if they've looked at the Keegan Swinson Leadville data set.
Johan Brunel has just had a heart attack hearing that. He doesn't want to hear about it.
Yeah, that is, of course, the above 3,000 meters gold standard, I think.
Let's go, Keegan. Let's go.
Context corner, the breakout right here. So Mortirolo, if people don't know what that is, 7.5 miles. Average grade, near 12%. The thing is a beast. Took you 43 minutes, 45 seconds. I hope I have these numbers right. Average watts, if you're just like listening to this, like, oh, I think I could just do what Jack did. Why don't I go get the KOM on the Mortirolo? 435 watts, average, I believe it's 66 kilos. Is that right?
Yeah, 66.6.
Yeah, it's a cool 6.5 watts per kilo at altitude in the winter time. Like, The Keegan, I don't know if Keegan could keep up. We actually had someone write into my show with Johan who was like, could Wout van Aert and Matthew Van Der Poel really do 5 watts per kilo for 6 hours? I'm like, dude, they might be doing that in zone 2. Like, yeah, that's seriously fast, Jack. 6.5 watts per kilo for over closer to an hour than 30 minutes. How many people, let's pick a random team, Total Energies. How many people can do that on that team?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, so the big thing, the biggest difference, like if we're going to talk training science, is being able to do those numbers fresh versus fatigued after, like, let's say 5 hours or so. And I mean, that's the thing that I get so much criticism for, and it's wrong because, like, I've proven I can do that after 4 hours or 5 hours in the race. Like one of the biggest races I won this year, I broke the record up the last 2 climbs going that, and that was 4 and 5 hours into the race for that. But that's a very different level of fitness. So if I look back, like, and the thing is, I get all the credit for the KOMs and stuff, but I actually think I had the best fitness I had this year was at the Ötztaler, which was a race that I won earlier in the year. Like my fitness was definitely higher for that. And that, what I'm referring to there is more around like the fatigue resistance for it. And if I look back, because I had to go through all my training files when I was writing this book, like I had to go through 10 years of Training Peaks data to figure this stuff out. The best fitness I've ever had was, and this also points to the fact of like how hard it is to make it in Europe, was February 2019. And that's when I first landed in Europe in my first year, because I was coming from Canada and training like a madman back in Canada. I came to Europe, went to Mallorca there, and I was flying. Like the numbers I was doing then, I still look back on it, I'm like, that's insane. Like it's...
Are we talking like 7 watts per kilo threshold?
No, but it's more like doing the numbers that I did in those KOMs, but after 5 or 6 hours and doing it day after day after day. Like, so the
repeatability.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like the performance test that we did there, again, it's like a 20-minute test, but I did 477 watts for 20 minutes there. And 2 days before that, I think it was like 440 TSS. It was like an 8-hour ride. That was like ridiculous. And I was doing like huge numbers on all the climbs at the end of, like I was riding like 7 hours a day there. And my teammates thought I was completely nuts because I was like stealing the bike from the mechanics room to go like ride before breakfast. And then I'd ride with the team and then I'd ride a few hours after. Like the training load then was huge. And yeah, the difference is, so, okay, if you were to get me to do these KOMs then versus now, the number would be about the same. But then I would have been able to do it after 5 or 6 hours of racing. And
Jack, I have to ask another thing that you mentioned. Well, 2 other things that jumped out at me as you were kind of given this narrative leading up to going after these KOMs. You mentioned you were training for Zwift Academy, and it's not, like, do you think that putting in more time on the trainer actually led to you seeing a marked improvement in your performance, or does it just so happen that that's the modality that you were using and there was nothing unusual about the results you got?
I think I could have still got, if I had trained just outside, I think I could have still done the same performances on the KOMs, but I do think the training, how do I say this? The training I was doing up to the KOMs, like if you look at the volume, for example, it was much, much lower. Like the hours were much lower. And that's where I say like my fitness was slowly going down for those KOMs. But because it was so specific, like the workouts on the trainer were so specific to the KOM stuff, because it's just like hour-long efforts all out. And so it's very specific that way. So in a way, I did like the most specific training for these KOMs. If I was to, like, let's say if I wanted to go back to Alpe d'Huez next year to train to do it, I wouldn't use the trainer as much. I would do more riding outside just to get the hours up for it, but I'd still use the trainer. Like I think the trainer is a really good tool to train for this. Like heat, and then like heat's the one that gets a lot of credit for it. The other big one, this is a huge thing that I learned from doing this, is there's definitely like an adaptation phase to getting on the trainer. And so that's why my coach wanted me to spend a lot of time on the trainer before doing all these Zwift Academy workouts. And for me, it was actually, so where did I write this? I think this is in the second edition of my book that just came out where I wrote about this, is that I found, what was it? I think it was something, I did a whole like correlation looking at my training data based on how many sessions you had to do versus how many hours on the trainer. So when I first got on the trainer, I think I was about across the board about 20 watts weaker than what I could do outside. So if I were to do the same effort on the trainer compared to outdoors, I was about 20 watts weaker at the start. As I spent more time on the indoor trainer, that gap got smaller. So by the end of it, I could do about the same numbers on the trainer that I could do outside. And it took something, I think I wrote it out, it was something like 30 sessions if you were to ride 2 or 3 hours each session. And if you were to only do like 1 hour sessions on the trainer, it would be more like 60 sessions. Like there was a correlation between hours and the amount of sessions you need. And it's because the muscles seem to fire different. Like I remember when I started doing all these trainer sessions, my plan was I'd do a trainer session in the morning and then I'd go ride outside and do a second session outdoors. And I just remember for these first sessions, and they were really intense sessions on the trainer, my legs were like jelly after. I'm like, I can't do anything useful out on the road right now. Like the rest of my body, I'm not that tired, but my muscles are wrecked right now. Like they're jelly. And then I think that goes away. And I think it's probably because of like the constant tension on the pedals. And the only thing I can compare it to is if you've ever done motor pacing before, like the first couple motor pacing sessions, you really notice your legs hurt a lot more because you have that constant pressure on the pedals and all those micro accelerations that you don't get from just training by yourself. And it's the same thing when you get into racing, when you're just constantly at higher speeds that way. I think that's like the most similar correlation. So there's definitely some other adaptations there aside from the heat benefit that everyone always talks about.
And then other than that, you also mentioned training for skimo, which seems to be another stealth training modality that is rising in professional cycling. We know Quinn Simmons and some other professional cyclists have an affinity for skimo and spend a lot of time training it. What do you...
We should say, do we know that Quinn spends a lot of time training skimo? Or does he just hockey? Like, now that I think
hockey too.
he definitely plays a lot of hockey around the holidays. But like, is he skimoing right now? Because Jack, you skimo like all winter, right?
Yeah. I'm going tomorrow. And I did yesterday.
And then you get out for like a casual 6-hour ride after dark.
Yeah, I got lights.
But yeah, back to Andrew's question, like on this, I am curious about this because you skimo all the time. It does seem like it'd be really good for, obviously it worked well for going into this season.
Do you want to hear my perspective on skimo for training?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So like if I was to be racing Tour Down Under or something like that, I would not be skiing. Like, right. Like you do need to spend a lot of time on the bike, and it's not as specific as that. The best example I can give you for that is, so if people watch the video of me doing the Alpe d'Huez KOM on YouTube, there's like a clip or on Instagram, whatever. There's a clip of me at the top of it, and I'm just sitting in my buddy's van, like because they were just driving up and down to take photos, and I'm just absolutely dying. Like I could not, I lost 3 years off my life doing this event. Like I went so deep, I could not have gone deeper or harder in that event. And then so there's that. That's as hard as I can go on the bike. Then last year I raced the World Championships Team Canada. And at the end of the vertical, there where it's just like a time trial up a mountain and you finish at 3,000 meters for that. Like it started at the top of a pass I always ride on the bike in the Dolomites and finished at over 3,000 meters. The level of just how like fucked I was at the end of that skimo race is a different planet from anything you can achieve on the bike. Like when you see the cross-country skiers falling over and laying in the snow after, that's how I was. Like I crossed the finish line and fell over. And I remember like the muscles around my rib cage you use for breathing were so tired. I felt like I was suffocating because I'm like, I can't even hold my rib cage open to breathe right now. I'm so crushed from it. Like you can't go as hard as you want, train as hard as you want, pick the steepest climb, go drink 10 cups of coffee, do whatever you want. You cannot go that hard on the bike. And the reason is the obvious one. You're using your whole body for skimo versus you're only really using your legs on the bike. The next one is the glide for it. So like you don't have as much resistance pulling against you because wheels roll over the ground better than skis glide across the ground. Third, you have these weights on your limbs like skis, and okay, the poles weigh nothing, but you have these and you're using your whole body to haul yourself up the mountain. So if you want to do like to train like the cardio system, if you do VO2 efforts on the skis, and also you're doing them so high, you're always doing them above 2,000 meters, you're doing them between 2,000 and 3,000 meters all the time, you cannot tax the cardio system like that, like you can on the bike. But, and the other good thing that comes from it that I noticed, at least for me, is it makes your hip flexors way stronger from always like dragging the ski. And that just, you have to spend time on the bike, otherwise your pedal stroke could be pretty sloppy, but it does seem to make that a lot stronger as well, which I really liked because that was always a bit of a weak point for me. I mean, the biggest benefit though for me is just that it's fun. Like to me, it's free training. It's like doing the work on the bike is like my homework, and then I get to go have fun after. I get to go skiing, and it's free training. It's fun. I enjoy it. It's like I'm not like if it's just snowing like crazy here, do I really want to go on the bike right now, or like maybe I can go on the trainer for a bit and then go skiing after? I mean, I normally just try to suck it up and go on the bike anyways, but I don't have to if I want. Like I can just go skiing if I want, which is great. You can do double days. Like it's just fun. That's the big thing.
And then another aspect of this that is of equal importance to all the physical training that you've talked about, this entire trajectory that you're describing, most people would have pulled the plug. They would have stopped doing this. They probably would have gotten severely depressed, honestly. So I'm wondering, what do you think has enabled you to persist and have this level of grit and resilience as you've gone through this process? And how has it challenged you from a mental health point of view?
Well, I mean, I'd say probably the biggest thing is having Swain Tuft as a mentor, like having that guy in my life very early. And the biggest thing I took from him, out of all the stuff he taught me, the biggest thing I learned from him was just how to appreciate right now. Like he has the tattoo on his right arm that says, "We will never be here again." And that really just resonated for me, where it's like, okay, yeah, there's like this, like trying to chase this dream is brutal. It's really hard. It's like rowing a lifeboat out in the middle of the ocean by yourself. It's really hard and depressing. And there's a lot of like tough moments for it, but it's a privilege to get to chase your dream. And like right now, this is a special time in your life when you're an adult, so you're independent, or at least trying to be. And then but everything is about you. Like I just realized it's like, okay, sure, I don't have all kinds of money, but I don't have car payments or house payments or all these other payments to make at the end of the month. I don't have anybody else depending on me. Like if I had a wife and kid, I'd have to be responsible and like get a normal job and think about them. But right now I can just focus on me. And it was also like a big thing for me is ever since I was a kid, I had so much, this is a big one. I had so much proof and evidence ever since I was a kid that I was good enough to race at the highest level. Like ever since I was a kid, the feedback I got from every coach, rider, everyone who ever met me is like, Jack has the best numbers. Jack trains the most. No one can train as much as Jack. Jack, we're going to be there at the tour when you're there in a couple of years. Jack's going to be in the World Tour next year. How isn't this guy in the World Tour? Like everybody around me was telling me that I was good enough for it. And I had like a lot of proof that said that I was good enough. And then so that was like, I just want to keep trying. And then I'd look at, okay, well, what's the other alternative? Okay, like worst case scenario, I don't make it. I wake up at 30 years old, but I got to spend all my 20s doing exactly what I want to do, chasing my dream, getting to travel the world, and know that I gave it absolutely everything I had. Like there was nothing left that I could do. And then the flip side to that, it's like, okay, let's say I quit at 26. So I quit at 26. I get a normal job. That would kill me. Like after knowing what it's like to get to spend your day doing what you want to do. Because I had a lot of these terrible jobs. Like I'd be working construction back in Canada to pay to get back to Europe a lot of years. And I'd just work 7 days a week, like construction Monday to Friday and landscaping Saturday to Sunday. And in Squamish in November doing that, it's like 2 degrees, you're freezing cold, you can't feel your hands, and you're freaking hating it because you just feel like a loser because you're low man on the totem pole at these job sites, having to clean up after guys that just hate their life and they're like doing coke to get through the day type thing. Like it's a miserable group to be around. I'm like, this sucks. And then I'd be like, well, I've been out on the road on my bike. Like I'm being paid to do this right now and I hate it. I've spent so much time out on the road, freezing cold, 7 hours on the bike, freezing cold, and I was not being paid to do it, and I loved it. And so it's like, at least I'm getting to do what I enjoy. And the thing that would kill me is if I quit at 26 years old, moved on, got a new job. It was like, okay, fine. It's like a fine job. I have like all this other good stuff. Great. The vision in my head that drove me nuts is like, I'd be like 29, 30 years old. I'd be in the kitchen or something like that. And I'd be watching the tour on the TV in the background. And I'd see some guy that I came up with racing. And let's say he was like not as good as me. And then I'm watching the tour and he's racing the tour and he's winning a stage at the tour. And the announcers are just talking about how this is the feel good story of the year because he's like the oldest person to start his first Tour de France and he's just winning a stage. And to think like that guy kept going and I quit and that could have been me. Like that would fucking kill me to have that. Like I couldn't fathom that. It's like I was running from that fear for so long because I was like, I know I'm good enough to make it. And the worst case scenario is not that bad. Like you wake up at 30 years old, okay, you didn't make it, but you can live the rest of your life knowing you did everything you possibly could. And then you start your next career. Like 30 is not old to start your next thing. And I also didn't know what else I could do. It's not like I had some other option to go home to. With that, it's not like there was another job or anything else I could think of that I might enjoy doing. Like, okay, now I have a plan B after like the book and all that kind of stuff. Like I know what I'll do for the rest of my life. But for my whole cycling career, I had no idea what I'd do. I'd be like, man, this is still better than having a job that I hate.
It just to like give people a perspective. You were like living in barns, right? In Europe.
Yeah. The barn wasn't even the worst. The worst was the bike shop. So yeah, that's the thing. That's how it works on a lot of these Conti teams is they'll tell you like they can't really pay you much, but they'll like organize a place for you to stay. But you're in Canada and they're in Europe and they're telling you they have a place to stay, but you don't know what that means when you get there. So like the worst one I lived in a bike shop and my bedroom was a concrete room that I was sharing with this Belgian guy that barely spoke English. We had no windows in the place. It was literally like a prison cell. And the only way you could get sunlight was if you set up a lawn chair in the parking lot next to the freeway. And I was just like, this is horrible. And then so that was the worst, but the barn was kind of fun.
Was the pillow like the Part Tools roll up of all the Allen?
It was this thick. It was like a pancake, and it was yellow.
It sounds like a Saw movie.
But when people are like, "Oh man, the results just aren't there," like this is the context in which you're competing at the highest level. You're waking up in a concrete cell versus someone like, let's say, Quinn Simmons, who's making really good money at the same age you were, living in a prison cell, basically.
Schemos right up to the starting line at every race.
Yeah, exactly. I'm such a Quinn fan, but yeah, it's like that. Well, that's the thing. It's like when you go, like, you know, people that are like critical of me, I'm like, okay, look at the results from the races that I won in 2020 and look at the finish line photos of the races I won in 2024. You know, it's the same thing. I'm wearing the same pair of shoes with holes in them. Like, it's like you have nothing for it that way. Like 2020, here's another fun, and I'm not trying to play like the soft story because this is the reality for everybody. I did not have it any harder than anybody else. This is what it's like. And this is why everybody comes over. And if they don't make it after 1 year, they quit and go home because they're like, it's brutal for that. And that's why I felt like I was qualified to write the book that I did, because I don't know of anyone who's tried for as hard and as long as I did, because I didn't have it any harder. I've just done it for longer. So I've just tried more of these things. But like, here's another example for you. In 2021, I went to Tucson in the winter to start training, and I didn't even have a team yet at the time. There was a rumor that maybe I could get on a Doug Ryder's Quebec team, like an agent called me, maybe that could happen. In January time, I was already down in Tucson training because I was wondering, like, okay, am I racing in the World Tour next year? And I find out I It's not going to happen. So now I got to scramble to find a team. I find a Conti team in Austria, and they promise you're going to be doing this race and all these great races and whatnot. And I basically bet the season on the Tour of Austria and the Tour of Upper Austria. Those are going to be like the two biggest races that we could do. I could get a good result there, and that could be like my ticket to the World Tour there. Trained my butt off for that. Tour of Austria got canceled because of COVID. So then the only one left was Tour of Upper Austria. I trained really well for that. And then, what was it? I got to get the dates right here. Maybe like a month before that, the head coach, the performance director for Israel Startup Nation, who's Paulo Saldana, he's a Canadian guy, and he coached me the year before. He reached out to see how things are going. And I told him, like, dude, I'm flying, like I'm doing really well here, but the bike I have doesn't have a rear brake on it. Like I'm racing with only a front brake on my bike. Like we have nothing for this. And then the team's not even going to races. Like we're driving to a race and the team turned around at a gas station because only a couple of us, they figured we're going to finish the race and they didn't want to drive all the way there for half the team to DNF. So we just turned around. And I'm like, I can't do both. I can't drive the car and race my bike at the same time. And so he was like, send me your training data and stuff. So I gave my Training Peaks data and the numbers were amazing. So then come all the suspicious questions, what power meter is it? When was it calibrated? Blah, blah, blah. Like normal questions, right? And I'm like, dude, it's an SRM. I just got it back 5 weeks ago. The numbers are right. I'm flying, dude. And I was probably being a little bit more cocky than I'm recalling now. I'm sure I was. But anyways, he's just like, oh, so he went and found the Strava segment that Emmanuel Bookman had. And it was like right close to where I live. And he's like, okay, if you're going so well, like go take a crack at that. Go do that tomorrow then if you're going so well. And now you're just like, shit, I hope my legs can back up my big mouth. And then so I went and I did it and I broke the record up it the next day and I sent him the file and I was just like, the stopwatch doesn't lie, dude. Like I'm going well. Like again, being real cocky and whatnot. Humility is not my strong suit. But like, and he loved it and he was stoked. But then he didn't say anything. So now fast forward like a month. It's the week before the Tour of Upper Austria. And I was the best rider on the team and I had a really good shot at winning the GC in the overall for this race. Like I had a good shot at it there. And I bet the year on this. I was living in an apartment with a guy who was fleeing Afghanistan because terrorists had blown up his leg. Like, so you can't complain about anything when you're living with a guy like that because look at how hard he has it. Like half his leg is gone for that because he's like literally fleeing terrorists trying to set up a life here. But I'm living with two people who are in their 50s to 60s. My room smells like cigarette smoke all the time because they smoke and I don't smoke. And so things like this are driving me insane. And I'm just like, I need to just get to Upper Austria. That's my shot. That will get me out of here. Like you just get through it. That's fine. The week before the race, I get a text message saying I'm not selected for the race. And I'm like, what? Like, and you see the guys that they pick. It's like there's some guys that they picked haven't finished a local race this year. And I'm like, what the fuck? And then so I call the director and the manager to be like, is this a mistake? Like, what's going on here? He's like, no, because it's the biggest race of the year. It'll make the sponsors happy if we only take Austrian riders because it'll make the sponsors happy. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, why am I here? Like, we're picking the roster based on where your passport comes from now. And everybody knows, again, really nice guys, but everybody knew half of them would DNF the second stage of this race. And that did end up happening. And so like that crushed me. That absolutely killed me. And then, so like the opening quote in my book is a Larry Bird quote. That's, I have this theory, if you give 100% all of the time, somehow things will work out in the end. And that kept coming true. And like that, you asked me before, but like my motivation to keep going, because that kept working out. So then the next morning, I got a text message from Paulo saying like, hey, what are you doing the following week? And I was like, well, I'm supposed to be at this race, but I just got left off the roster. So now nothing. And he's like, oh, well, Chris Froome and the Tour de France team are having their last training camp before the tour to do like some recon of the stages and the final prep and for the final selections for the Tour de France team in Annecy. If you can get there, like you can join the camp. And I'm like, dude, I will go to Jupiter if that, like, yes, I'm in, like I'm there. And then I got to go to this training camp and it was the best week of my life. Like it was amazing. And that was great. And then I had the best legs of my life there. And I later found out, like months and months later, I was like the last one to find out that Chris Froome started calling people who knew me on the second day. Like he called the team manager and was like, where the hell did you find this guy? And then he called Matthias Brenley because Brenley was also on the team. And he knew, I guess I'd mentioned in front of Chris that Brenley and I train together sometimes. And so he called Brenly being like, who the fuck is this guy and why isn't he in the World Tour? And he was really trying to push me to get me onto the team. And he's the reason I got invited back to some more training camps later that year. But then, so it's like, you have to check a couple boxes to get a World Tour contract. You have to show you have the physiology to be good enough there. I checked that box. You have to show you're like a good guy, like the guys like you fit in with the team. The guys seemed to like me, and I fit in well enough to get invited back, and I seemed to check that box. And the third box is you have to show you know how to race your bike. You have to get some results or something like that. It's 2021. Most of the races were canceled due to COVID. And then the handful of races that we were doing, like I said, like I'm racing with one brake on my bike. Maybe we have someone to give you bottles in the race. Or for a lot of them, they're telling you, it's like, yeah, can you guys just start with like 2 bottles in your pockets? So you can just start the race with 4 bottles. And you're like, what the like, it doesn't matter how hard you train at this point. If like, this is what you're doing. Like you're trying to beat the best development teams in the world that are run like World Tour teams. And that's amazing. Those kids absolutely deserve those chances. But to expect guys with not nearly that level of support to be competing with them, it's like, that's just not a fair comparison there. And it's not about things being fair, but it's like, just look closer. Like Pro Cycling Stats does not show you this data there.
Well, yes. Yeah. This is like a pushback I've personally gotten when I've talked to teams about you. But I get very frustrated. But even like 2018 Colorado Classic, I remember this race. Jack Burke, second, young rider classification. That's a big race to be second. You know, anyone know who finished first?
Oh, the
little rider called Danny Martinez. Done pretty well for himself. Like you beat Nielsen Palace. There's people behind you. Nielsen Palace, Matteo Jorgensen, Chris Blevins, Lucas Hamilton, Pascal Enkhorn. Like these are all top guys in the World Tour. Like I don't know. Like seems like you can race your bike. If I was gonna have to make a judgment.
Yeah, and so to go back to 2018. So at the end of 2018, there were 5 World Tour teams that were talking to me, and all of them said the same thing. And this is the advice I give to like younger guys trying to make it from Australia, Canada, the US. All 5 of those teams said, you have the engine to race at the highest level. And the big one from 2018 that got a lot of people's attention was the Mount Megantic stage that I won there, because they could compare the times to other guys that have won that stage in the past. But they all said the same thing. It's like, we need to see it in Europe. I'm like, okay. So like, I didn't know what that meant at the time. I was so clueless when I got on the plane to Europe. And that's going back to what I was saying about Matteo, is he knew everything and I knew nothing. And that's why he did much better than me in 2019. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. So like 2019, I was on an amazing development team. That was awesome. Like Leopard, I had great support. They shoved racing down my throat. And by the end of that year, I'd figured it out. And so I was doing all the wrong races for my physiology. Like I was basically just racing classics all year. But it was the best thing for my development because it teaches you positioning, bike racing, like how to race your bike, how to not start the climb at the back, basically, like how to fight to be at the front of the climb. And that was amazing. And by like end of August, October-ish, September, October, I was consistently the worst guy in the front group. So I was in like breaks with like Van der Poel and Wout van Aert and them, and like I can't sprint to save my life. So I was just like worst guy in the front group all the time. But at least I was making those front splits. And that was like, okay, I've actually figured out how to race my bike. And Steve Bauer was actually at one of those races. And I impressed him enough that he really pushed for me as well. It's like, oh shit, okay, Jack can actually race. Like this is good. Like that was a really hard race. And a lot of good guys didn't finish that race. But then, so that was 2019. Then 2020 and 2021 is basically wiped out because of COVID there. 2022, I broke my pelvis in May. And then the team decided to stop going to races because the director wasn't motivated because a lot of guys weren't training. So look, breaking my pelvis, that was all my fault. And I broke it at the altitude camp before the 3 biggest races of the year. So that hurt me there. And then at the end of 2022, I went through the scouting process with Bora, and that was amazing. That was great. And they tried to put me onto a Pro Conti team for 2023. It didn't work out, but then I was hit by a car, and that's what ended my career at the very end of 2022. Or sorry, the very start of January 10th, 2023, I was hit by a car when I was out training, and that's what ended my career. But that's the story.
I mean, 2019, Tour of Alsace, big race, great race. Stage 2, Tom Pidcock wins it. You finish within a minute of him. You finish right behind Felix Gall, great rider, in front of Maxime Van Hills, who's like the new classics star on Red Bull. So It is actually a little frustrating when people are like to even be in the front group at a race like Tour of Alsace, people don't understand the skills you need. Like not even just the physical, but the bike handling skills you need and the pack skills you need. Like that is quite, now I'm frustrated, Jack. Now you got me worked up.
I appreciate, and to go back, okay, so to like look at a lot of these races, like I want to make it clear, it's like I messed up a lot of opportunities all on my own just by overtraining and way overdoing it. So like I remember that Tour of Alsace. The big one there that killed me was the heat because it's like 35 degrees. I am horrible in the heat, and I didn't know anything about heat prep or anything like this. I just remember dying from the heat that whole race. But like for a lot of the races, I way overtrained. So like you were talking about Tour of Colorado before. I think the biggest block of training I've ever done in my life was leading up to Tour of Utah and Tour of Colorado in 2018. Because again, I had to go through and put all these details in when I wrote the book. But it's like I was so overtrained and crushed starting those races. Like I look back and I'm like, Jesus, like how good could I have been if I just would have chained myself to my bed for like 2 weeks or so?
Yeah.
Because I always pushed way too much. And that was a big thing that I learned this year when I didn't care about my training. I only thought about my training when I started putting my shoes on. And then as soon as I clicked the button on my computer at the end of the ride, I stopped thinking about it. Like I ate whatever I want. I got back to work. I'd sleep as much as I could. And I was like Jack the athlete for like 4 or 5 hours a day, or 3 to 5 hours a day when I was training. And that's it. Instead of always pushing more and more and more.
Andrew, do you have any overtraining stories to tell?
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to go too deep into the spirit of gravel, but Jack, something we've talked about a lot on this podcast recently is the training logs of gravel pros. I'm in Phoenix. Spencer and I are preparing for the Great Convergence in Tucson on Monday to do a bit of training of our own. But as you know, Jack, like 50 hours is the new 40, 40 is the new 30, and 20 is a recovery week in gravel now. And just looking at the history of endurance sports the last 30 or 40 years, especially if you look at Ironman triathlon, actually in the early to mid 80s, late 80s, and what's happened to those athletes over time, we know it's just a recipe for burnout, Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue if you go too deep for too long. So it's a hot topic here.
Yeah. And look, I did that for a long, so there was, okay, does it work or not to train that much? So like I said, like the best fitness I've ever had would have been February 2019. The months leading up to that were, and in years prior as well, when I did well, it was all like 40 to 45 hour training weeks between the bike and cross country skiing. And that was great. And so it does work, and nothing like that bad ever happened to me. It's not like I ever got any sort of, like I'd just be tired. I'd take like a day or two off and I'd be fine. And I'd be good to go again. But I think that worked, but I think the way that I train now is much more efficient. And so I don't think I would stick to the happy medium. So like I wouldn't train the 40-hour weeks anymore right now. And I wouldn't even really train above 30 hours that much anymore now. Like now my training is a lot more in the 20s, or I mean, for a lot of it, it's in the teens. But like when I'm focused seriously on training, it's a lot more in the 20s. And I do find that to be a lot more efficient. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I have so many of those monster weeks of volume in the past. But I think it's also like you have to try it, like to figure out like, okay, this is maybe not the best thing. And that's the thing. It's like my training is just much more efficient now, and it's way more structured now. Like every minute of every ride, I have to be staring at the screen for like a 5-hour ride. I'm doing intervals the whole time, basically, or like cadences and wattages and heart rates the whole time. Versus in the past, it would be like, okay, 5 or 6 hour ride, and you have like some intervals somewhere in the middle. And then the other riding time is just like getting the hours in. There's no just getting the hours in time now. Everything is structured now. And so yeah, there's that. And then I guess the other big change would have been, and this is also much bigger, like North America, and you could, I guess, include gravel racing in that compared to European bike racing. In North America, it's much more common to do the 3 weeks on, 1 week off, like 3 weeks, build, and then you have a rest week sort of thing. And you basically finish that 3 weeks in a body bag, and then you like recover over a couple days and freshen up again. Versus in Europe, you never really have the time because you race so much. You never have the time for those full rest weeks. So the training is just much more moderate. So like for this year, for example, in I think 4 months or so, like from when Steve and I started working together until like the races that I was doing, I never had a rest week. Every week was between like 18 to 25 hours. And like, it was just like, I was never crushed. It was always just like a very manageable amount of training. So I never needed a full rest week to shut down. And because I never put myself in those big holes, I think it worked out better.
Andrew, you should say those people you're talking about are not winning. So it's like, I feel like people lose they get lost in the sauce sometimes. Like I put in 50 hours.
That's true. I mean, I think, Jack, you make a really good point that if you're in Europe, you're racing constantly and you're just never going to have time to do, like, I'm going to do a 3-week build in the middle of the season. Perhaps that's part of it too, is these like professional gravel riders, they're competing probably less than 10 times a year, actually. So I don't know, maybe to get to that level without the intensity of racing, that's what they have to do. That's not what people are here though for. What they want to know, Jack, is are you going to go to the world tour, and where are things at right now? What doors are opening? What doors are shutting? What's the sit rep? What have we got?
It doesn't look like it's going to happen with the world tour. As much I'd love to be able to tell people if I was getting that contract, doesn't look like it's going to happen. Can I say the teams? I don't think that's going to give me any trouble. Yeah. Okay. I don't think that's going to give me any trouble. So, okay. The coolest one, the coolest one that happened was, aside from getting a phone call from Johan Verneel, that was pretty sick. But I was eating dinner one night and I just like open up my phone and there's an Instagram message from Machin, like the boss at UAE, just like knows all about me, wants to talk to me all the time. I'm like, what the hell? And like, this is sick. And then so like I went through, like they got all my training stuff. And in the end, they had already promised, they had one spot left on the team and they had already promised it to a younger rider on the team, and they didn't want to go back on that promise. I was like, okay, that's fine. DSM, or now Picnic, they reached out, they got my training stuff and they just passed on it. Red Bull was probably the closest one. Like I had like a meeting. I already know like a lot of the coaches and staff on the team, either from my podcast or going through the scouting process in the past. And that was probably the closest one. And I just found out that's not going to happen, which is a shame. What else is there? There's a rumor going around about Visma. That wasn't true. I don't know where that came from. I didn't talk to, so I know some of them and they know about me, but they were never talking to me about this. Who was it? So there's UAE, Red Bull, DSM, Alpecin was one, ISN was one, but they were already completely full on their Devo team and their pro team. Like they just don't have any spots. Who else is there? Shoot, I'm definitely forgetting some teams now.
What about Israel?
Yeah, I just said them. They're
full.
Okay.
Yeah. But why? The funny thing about all these teams is they're all very good. Like there's a lot of teams in professional cycling that just don't have the riders with the talent you have. I'm surprised that they're not reaching out.
I'd love that, man. And the biggest thing I've always told them, it's like, invite me to a training camp. Like, let me come to Q36.5. That was another one.
Where's Intermarché in this conversation?
Oh, they also reached out. They said they didn't actually even look at the training. They were just like, no, we're good right away. Like they
looked at your bar width. They're like, no, this guy's not coming on the team. Yeah.
Well, that's the biggest thing. Like, that's what I would say to them. It's like, if you think I can't race my bike, if you think I'm not good enough, like, invite me to a training camp and let's see. Like, stack the deck against me, bet against me, make it impossible for me, make it so hard for me to like be impressive for that way. Like, just give, like, I just want the chance. Like, I'll pay all the costs. I'll jump through whatever hoops you want me to do. Like, I will do whatever you want. I just want the chance to actually show it. That's been my biggest thing.
You also, I think you would count as a neo-pro because you've only been on continent. No, you don't. Are you too old? Or?
Apparently, I'm too. I don't know the rules for that. We were talking about that when I was talking to Israel, and Kel, the manager, the GM there, said that I wouldn't count as a neo-pro, so they'd have to give me a real contract.
That does complicate it. To be a slam dunk if you were. That's funny, huh? I'm going to look into that. Why would you not? I remember like Ted King famously was a neo-pro, like around your age. I mean, on the topic of all these teams, like I don't want to hear it in July when it's like every year it's like, oh, we don't all the best riders are on UAE. It's like, well, okay, get creative. Like Moneyball, like everyone wants to talk about Moneyball, but no one wants to actually do it. Like Billy Beane, he was picking guys nobody wanted. Like people thought Jeremy Giambi was a terrible, terrible decision. It's like it's uncomfortable. If it's uncomfortable, it might be good.
So you want a little insider baseball on this here. This is new cycling. This is pretty crazy. So now there's a lot of AI softwares that there's a lot of AI softwares now to analyze training. And we use this for my training as well this year. And it's crazy how accurate and good it is. It's really good. And now a lot of these World Tour teams have these AI softwares for, Ineos, that was another team that reached out of like the 7. Then, with these AI softwares, that's how they used to analyze training. So if in the past, when a team would ask you for your training peaks stuff, they would ask you for that just so they could, like, coach could like look through and look at your power profile and blah, blah, blah. I don't know exactly how it works, and it's different for all the teams. Like, I'm not up to, I think a lot of them have their own AI software. And so I don't want to get out of speak about something I don't know, but I think a lot of them, they just like plug your training peaks into their AI software and it will just put everything in that way. And the big thing with a lot of these teams that reached out to me is like they were asking me for my training peak stuff, and I'd forgotten the password to it because I didn't use training peaks this whole year. And I was just lucky that it was still auto uploading all my rides. But again, like I thought I was retired, so I didn't ever open training peaks this last year. And so I was just like, okay, you can have all my data. Like it's all in there, but like, keep in mind, I wasn't really like, I started in May. I thought I was training to be a skier and then all this other stuff, but like I think it's super powerful. It's a wonderful tool to use those AI softwares, because I was not a believer in them at all when my coach started showing me this stuff, but it's spot on. It's perfectly accurate. It's crazy. I would just say it's like, it doesn't show the full picture and you can't rely only on that.
Yes. And we were talking about this before we recorded, but like Johan Bernil, someone you mentioned, like I was at Thanksgiving and he like called me up. He's like, we got to do an episode on this guy, Jack Burke. Have you seen his numbers? But one big question he like could not get past is like, how could someone like this slip through the cracks? How could someone this talented slip through the cracks? I think both of us, not being from Europe originally, I think we kind of understand like a lot of super talented people are slipping through the cracks. If you don't have a Schengen passport, it's just, as you say, like you maybe only have 12 months to prove it, or you go home because it's so uncomfortable you can't stay.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, and I messed up plenty of opportunities on my own. But if you go through my career, like the biggest one that derailed me is like, as a junior, I was the best junior in the country and like one of the best in North America. And I was winning everything I entered there. And then I got knocked into a different life because of a positive drug test that we later found out was not officially a mistake with the testing system, but we later found out it's like, a mistake with the testing system. Like they just made it so refined that they were finding stuff in the natural environment that caused me to test positive for that. But for 3 years, I went from being the best junior in the country to not even a club team would let me ride for them because everybody thought I was a doper and a cheater. And then the truth finally came out years later that, hey, this guy didn't do anything wrong. And by then it's like, okay, you've already lost a couple years of your career there. And it took me a really long, so when I tested positive as a junior, it was 2013. I got knocked into a different life there. And then 2016, a team finally gave me a shot. That was when I got on my first Continental team. And when the press release went out, one of the sponsors called the team owner to fire me, to get rid of me. And he's like, why? And he's like, well, he just pulled up some article about me testing positive. And he's like, the team owner's like, did you read the article? The whole thing is about how he was wrongly convicted of this and treated like a cheater when he was found innocent for all this stuff. And the sponsor just said, I don't care. I don't want his name with our team. Like a lot of teams, it's just, like, it's that cut and dry. So then 2016, I got onto a Continental team. 2016, 2017, 2018, it took me 3 years to make it back to the top of the level in North America. By the end of 2018, I was one of the best riders in North America there. I got shot at Europe. I came to Europe in 2019, got 1 good year of like racing there and learning how to race and getting everything. Everything was great that year. And it was all just me screwing up, like just learning how to live there. Like, again, a lot of the problems that we already talked about, like getting your groceries by bike in the snow when you might have a broken bone. Like if you break a bone or something like that, or you're completely carved up, there's nobody here to help you. Like it's just you. Like you still got to go get food. There's nobody that's going to help you with any of this stuff. So like, it was just like being depressed and miserable and hating it and wanting to go home and like living in like solitary confinement basically for 9 months. I got home at the end of 2019, 2020, come back to Europe. COVID, that takes out 2 years right there. That's 2020, 2021, 2022. Okay, on to a normal team. Going to have some good races here. Everything's good. I broke my pelvis there in May. That ruined my season there. And then the car crash at the end of the year, that's what ended my career. So it's like, yeah, there's a lot. One of the big bits of advice I give in my book is you have to design a life that you enjoy so much that you're willing to keep trying, because you can do everything right and get a flat tire or break your pelvis or whatever at the wrong time, and that opportunity's gone. So you have to just keep trying, and you have to genuinely love trying, because you will never last as long as the guy who just enjoys it and views this life as a privilege. If you're just doing it on grit and delaying your happiness until you get a pro contract, you will never last as long as the guy who's just having fun trying.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of, like if you were, let's say, Jack Burke, young man, 1995, like Swain Tuft, like you would probably be on one of these teams, these American-based teams, Canadian-based teams, and people were making good livings, like 6-figure livings, which is one of the funny things in like Phil Guyman's books, always complaining that he's like only making $50,000 a year. And like you would have killed to be making $50,000 a year racing in the US. But how do you think, basically that's all been eliminated. If you're a good North American rider, you go to Europe, you get on a European team, or you race gravel. And like those are your two options. Like, has that really, do you think that in North America, the level will decline? Has it declined? Like, how do you see that affecting North American racing?
Yeah, and that's really sad. And so like a lucky opportunity I got was that I got out of North America just as the ship was sort of sinking. Like my last real race in North America was Tour of Colorado, or the Colorado Classic in 2018. And a lot of people would say that was the last race of the real like North American road scene. And when I wrote the first edition of my book, there was a chapter in it and I cut it. And so I lost the data. And when I wrote the second edition, I tried to put it back in, but I couldn't find the data for it. But what I did was I took the key stages of North American racing. So I think it was the Mount Megantic stage in Tour de Beauce, the Redlands Oak Glen stage, or Oak Glen Summit finish, and the Sunset Loop stage, the Joe Martin time trial stage, the Nebo, and what's the other one? The Tour of Utah, the Nebo finish, and the Snowbird finish there. And then a couple other ones, like just all the key, like the races that have been won in North America by guys that end up going to the World Tour from that, like all those key stages. And I compared the times from 2016 to 2018, and then the times from 2019 to 2021. And on average, it was something like 43 seconds slower from 2019 to 2021, which is insane. Like, and I'm just talking about like the summit finishes. Oh, Mogollon from Gila was another one, and the Gila Monster stage. And so like if you're just looking at one climb and the average times are 43 seconds slower when everything else has just gotten way faster. Like you look anywhere else in cycling, it has just gone like whoosh, like it's gone way faster, and it got way slower in those years because after 2018, a lot of the guys either made it to Europe or retired because all the big teams went away. And so that's really a shame that the level has gotten a lot lower in North America there. And that really sucks for guys that want to try to develop there.
You're making me all nostalgic saying these finishes. I'm going to start crying on here. I mean, Andrew and I saw it. We should have been at Tulsa Tough in person. We copped out. We were not there, but this beautiful German man, Moritz, I forget his last name, but we got to have him on the show. But he soloed away and won the Saturday race, which is fast. It's a fast course. And it was like his aero discipline was unbelievable. Great ride. But it's like, I don't think that would have been possible back in the height, like the UHC days, because they just would have put their train on the front and mowed you down. And it was like really stark to see just the level of engines at like the top American crit scene. It's just been a noticeable decline since even I raced 5-6 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough. I mean, you can have a lot of fun racing gravel and stuff like that, like for the guys that want to do that. But I really feel for the guys that are in North America that want to race the tour. Like they want to get to the tour. It's like, okay, I had a couple things going against me, like, COVID and those other things. But I also was lucky that I got those 3 years, 2016, 17, and 18 to develop with like some good races in North America. And people really cared about it then. And that's gone away. So now, I mean, how do you get to Europe from North America now? You basically have to get onto one of these crazy Conti teams. Sorry, I would not recommend that. I would like you have to be super young send teams like performance data and stuff. And teams will look at that. If you are a young rider, if you can get onto one of these development teams based on power data, that absolutely is possible. But that's only for the guys that are super young. If you miss that, I mean, it used to be the under 23 cutoff, but now it's like a junior cutoff. If you miss that now, it's like you're basically relying on luck to get to Europe. And then you're praying when you get to Europe, you have like the basic stuff to live and get by there.
It's like when you talk to Larry Warbuss, it's shocking how big he's always like, yeah, I was racing, then I was on the U.S. national team. But it's like, that's the big step. Like these USA Cycling would take people over and you didn't have to be winning pro races. And then you would get on a U23 team and you could have like multiple years of good support. Like, not just by yourself with one brake on your bike, lugging yourself to the hospital in the snow. And that's key. And that's now gone. But Jack, are we going to see you in gravel? Is this 2025? Are you going to win Leadville?
Wait, can I go back to something you just said before I answer your question there? So the Matteo thing we were talking about before, Matteo is the example of using the U.S. national team. So if you asked him, he'd probably say, yeah, he got really lucky that the U.S. national team was really good the year that he went, because that got him a ton of racing experience there. But to people that think I'm crazy for saying he's not that talented, here's the story. Matteo was supposed to go to Action the year that he raced with me on Jelly Belly. Action didn't take him because they didn't think he was good enough. They didn't think he was talented enough to make it. So Action didn't give him a spot. And that's how he ended up on Jelly Belly with me. Like, there you go. Like, that is such an inspiring story. Like, clearly that fired him up to be like, okay, I'm going to show you. And he's been like the most, I think he's probably been more successful than any rider Action's ever sent. I mean, maybe Jasper Philipsen, I guess, but anyway, sorry.
I guess America. That is, huh? That's I
crazy,
didn't know
right?
that story. That's kind of crazy. And then
cool, right?
Matteo, I guess he's just built different, because then he goes to Van Rysel, the AG2R development team. He's a stagiaire, and then they want him not to go pro. And he's like, no, I'm going pro. So he goes to Movistar 2020, just learn Spanish. Like, I'm sure everything you do at that team is in Spanish. He's like, no, I'll just learn Spanish. I'm good to go.
It's
like that.
Crazy.
Not what a normal person would do. Super impressive.
Incredibly impressive stories about making the most of what you have. But okay, am I going to go to gravel? If I had the budget to do it, sure. I mean, like, it's so much more organizing. So like for me, for 2025, like, what are my plans? I guess I'm going to do a lot of these like road marathons, like these amateur road races that I did this last year. And then the big goal for me is I want to try to win the cross country mountain bike marathon world championships. Like, I'd really love to be a world champion, and I really want to go for that. So those are the two big ones. And those take priority. Gravel would be third on that list. And the thing is, like, gravel requires the bigger budget and more organizing. Like, I can kind of do the road racing and mountain bike marathon racing with less support and managing a lot more stuff on your own. To do gravel
bikes from Scott? Yeah. Is that the plan? Okay.
That's nothing's official yet, but they were talking about that.
I mean, I don't understand gravel. Andrew's our in-house gravel correspondent. I don't understand the finances of gravel, because what you're like, it is so expensive to go to all those races for the athlete.
Yeah.
I guess they're just getting paid enough to their sponsor deals, but I mean, some of them seem to have full-time mechanics. I don't get how any of that works.
I think, Jack, I think you actually have the infrastructure and the most important components you would need to be a gravel pro, which I don't think actually are about physical talent, although you do need some of that. I think more so it's about having an audience and a content engine. And I think if you have those things, gravel actually is just an enabler of your content production. I think that's really I know
nothing about gravel, just to be clear. Like, so if you want to tell me what I need for it, I'm like, okay, bike, registration.
I think you have the right stuff. And this is not a knock on Chad Haga, who seems to be a super nice human being, incredibly talented, took second at Unbound 100 last year. Something I've thought about recently is, Chad nearly wins Unbound last year. Lachlan, of course, ends up winning the race. Even Lachlan did other remarkable things last year. But I think within the domain of gravel and the audience that those brands and businesses are trying to reach, I think that people like Dylan Johnson, Drew Dillman, Chase Work and Drew Dillman in particular, who didn't win really any super big gravel races last year, but they make great content. They're funny. They're personable. They do novel things with their equipment. And they're just interesting human beings, as you are, Jack. And you also, of course, like have like a very high level of talent. But I think those are the things that makes it possible for someone to have a gravel career now. And I think winning is actually ancillary at this point. I think within the world of like super core cycling and sponsors, people probably still pay attention to that. But the reality is they're marketing to people in their like 40s, 50s, 60s. Those are most of the participants. They do like to watch the pros mix it up. They follow the competition side closely, but more so they're consuming all the content that these athletes are putting out. So
the problem that I have is that I there will be a time in my life when I just want to be like the content creator going to these races and stuff like that. But right now I'm still at the point where I just want to compete at the highest level. That's why I was going to go to the skimo route, because I was like, here's a sport where I can compete at the highest level. I could maybe try to go to the Olympics for that. Like, I didn't care at all about the fact that there's no money in that sport, and there's no money in that sport at all. But I was like, skis, boots, poles, simple. Like, it's way easier than bike racing. It's a much smaller sport. It requires less money. I don't care about the money part of it at all. I just want to compete at the highest level. And that's why the Marathon World Championships is such a big goal for me. Even if it's like, some people would say it's less prestigious than saying like Unbound or something like that. But to me, it's like, you're still a world champion. Like, that's way more important to me than that. So if I'm racing, I want to be an athlete. Like, I want to be competing at the highest level. I don't want to be going to take Instagram videos and whatnot. Like, I do that to make my friends laugh and just like whatever. But like, that's not my, like, if I was to be a content creator, I would just do that. But if I'm competing, I want to be competing for it. And then the problem with like gravel racing is like, okay, am I going to go do, I've done nothing to try to get a spot in Unbound. So I'm not saying, I don't want to come across arrogant that way, but it's like, if I got a spot in Unbound, am I going to fly all the way across the world? How much does that cost to bring all the support staff, all the organization to do all that stuff? And then maybe you get it sounds like these guys get 15 flat tires in this race. And I'm like,
don't do Unbound. We're both from the area. It's a trap. Don't do it. Like,
well, that's what I mean. Like, I can just do fun, like races that are closer to me here. Like, that it's just easier. There's less risk rather than flying around the world for a race and then you get a flat tire or something like that. And it's one thing when you have like a team and everything else like help with that kind of stuff, but when you're doing it on your own, it's like, I don't want to take that risk. Like, it's not worth it.
Would you ever consider Unbounded to a lot? It's a flat race. I mean, it's hills, but it's a lot of variables. Would you ever consider
Leadville?
Like, Leadville? Yeah.
Hell yeah. I'd love to race Leadville. That's sick. I love that race. I've been a fan of that race since before I started bike racing. Like, when I was right when I was like 11 or 12 years old, I was working in a bike shop, and there's a DVD. That's how long ago this was. There's a DVD called The Race Across the Sky, and it was all about the Leadville 100.
Yeah, I remember this.
And I watched that, and I was like, this is the coolest race ever. So I've been a fan of that race forever, and it's sick. I'd love that. I love following Keegan. Like, the stuff he posts is really cool. And I think Keegan's also the guy where it's like, I think he just wants to focus on the training stuff, and he's like annoyed with having to make like content, which I really admire that. I really like that. But I'm a big fan of Keegan Swenson.
I mean, he's like also leveraged the terrain so well in his favor. Like, altitude monster, optimizes everything for altitude, and then the race. I don't know if you've ever been to Leadville. It is uncomfortably high. Too high, I would say. Like, it is wild up there.
Totally. I'd love to race that.
Well, Jack, we don't want to keep you. You got to get out. It's probably evening time, so you have to get out for like a 7-8 hour ride in the snow.
Exactly.
Lights are charged. Are you you're in Europe for the long haul? Like, just from like a personal side? You prefer
I think
lifestyle?
I'll live here. Yeah, I like it. Like, the lifestyle suits me better. Like, there's a lot of stuff that I like about like culturally here, but the big one for me, at least for right now, is it's so much easier to do the hobbies that I love. So like all the, like, whether it's skimo, biking, mountain biking, trail running, all this stuff, it's just easier in Europe because they have so much infrastructure. Like, it's wonderful to do that stuff in North America, and you do miss the wide open spaces. But like, the joke I'd have with my friends would come out to visit me that I've done all these trips with in BC. And we'd make a joke where it's like, hey, to do this same trip in North America, we need a 30-liter pack with all this safety gear. And if you roll your ankle, you might die.
Yeah.
Versus in Europe, to do it, it's like, we just need a credit card and they'll do everything for you. They got gondolas and huts and chairlifts and all this stuff. Like, it's so easy. Like, for me to go ski touring in North America, I'm like putting snow chains on my truck and driving up some crazy logging road and avalanche conditions, and you need somebody to go with and all this stuff. Here, I can drive in a 2-wheel drive car in my flip-flops, to the bottom of a ski lift and then just like start going. Like it's so easy. It's great.
Yeah. The same thing with cycling too. Like I live in Boulder.
Totally.
And to do an 8-hour ride, like you really got to think about it. And it's a little scary, it's like you're out and like, I haven't seen anyone for an hour. Like what would happen if I crashed? I don't have cell reception. And in Europe, it's like, hey, you just need a credit card. You'll be good to go. Yeah.
I have the Dolomites, an hour drive from me. Like that's the best cycling in the world. And it's an hour drive in the car. It's amazing. It's like, it's paradise for cycling here.
I'd say most beautiful place I've ever ridden my bike. The Dolomites. Yeah. Really, really beautiful. Well, Andrew, do you have any more questions before we go?
I mean, I could keep going on gravel for another hour. It's about more than Instagram. There's a lot there. I could see.
I'll go. You want to go? I want to hear. I want to learn.
We're gonna do part 2. I just think like my last thought on gravel. If you want to get your toes wet without having to dive into a Mate Mahoraj situation where you travel 15 hours to get a flat tire, you do have the UCI World Cup races for gravel that you're proximate to those. So that I think that would be a good way to get a bit of that experience. So of course the Traka and a lot of other big gravel races not too far from you. So honestly, I'm still pulling for you to get into the world tour, and I think it's going to happen. And if it doesn't, I think it would be fun to see what you could do with gravel. And I'd love to read a book about that as well.
Dude, I would love to race gravel, but I think the biggest thing for me is I just need somebody to like hold my hand and show me what to do. Like, okay, do this race, register here. Like, okay, just like tell me what to do. Like, I'm the guy that just focuses on the train. Well, I've been institutionalized because I've been in cycling teams my whole life where you just do whatever races they tell you. And now I'm like having to figure this stuff out on my own. I'm like, okay, I don't know how to do any of this. Like, I know I sound like a 5-year-old kid, but it's like the real issue for me.
Yeah, I mean, Spencer and I have talked about starting a Moneyball style world tour team at some point. It's not that far-fetched to think that we might actually get started with a Moneyball gravel team, roll in, dominate that branch of the sport, and go from there. So stay tuned. This could be our first signing. This could be the beginning of something big.
Jack said he likes winning though, so we might get disqualified before we start. The powers that be will pull our license. We don't want you there if you like competition. Well, thank you so much, Jack. Oh, what's your fastest time on Mount Limit? You said you were in Tucson training.
Oh shoot, I don't think I ever went all out up that. I never went for that KOM. I honestly couldn't tell you. I've climbed that mountain a million times. I know that climb so well, but I don't think I ever like gave it some stick on that climb. I don't have time for you. What's the record? Like an hour 20 or something like that?
Something like that. I was actually trying to look it up.
I think it's Lionel Sanders at this point. Duel had it for a while. I mean, I think the more important question is if you want that KOM, we haven't asked this question. Have you ever been a rower? Because that seems to be a qualifying criteria for most American KOMs.
I have not been a rower. I've been a hockey player.
Yeah, pulled the oars. Like I don't know if you have a shot at Mount Limit.
Gotcha. Okay. Keep that in mind.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we wish you the best of luck. And we're not giving up hope on the dream. We think
I'm not giving up on it either. It's like, I would love it to happen. It's just, it like people keep asking. So I'm just being honest. I'm like, I don't think it's going to happen, but I'd love it to happen. That's still my dream. The tour and the Olympics, world tour, those have been my 3 dreams since I was a kid.
It would be hilarious if you went to the Olympics without being on a team. Just like an attached rider.
And imagine you like,
I think that happened with the women actually.
Imagine if you, that's Anna Kiesenhofer. That's, well, no, wait, did she have a team?
I think she was not on a team that year.
That's right. That was, I remember that.
So there's precedent.
Win the gold medal without a team. That'd be so sick. Retire there, mic drop.
It could happen.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And we'll check back in middle of the season.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
All right. Awesome. Good talking.